I'm Kate Stapleton, Director of the NRC. Thank you so much for having me here.
And Will Loper of the Ham Ridge Craft Competition.
I'm Bowdie, Bentz. I did Slug season.
All right, I'm sorry. Yeah.
It's all right.
It's festival brain, it's not working. Let's just open it up to everybody out here. I know there's a lot of questions.
Kate, I thought it was a beautiful, beautiful story.
Thank you.
And I was wondering what compelled you to tell the story.
So my husband, who's sitting in the middle of the room here, and who also composed the screenplay for the film, he was also on stage, he drove the bus, he made the fried rice and the wok. But he said to me a couple years ago, several years ago, after my daughter, who I placed for adoption, had come to college and was spending a lot of time with us. He's a high school teacher, and he spends a lot of time with storytelling and kids, and he just looked at me and said, I think that this is a story you need to tell. Nobody's done it. As far as I know, there are no documentaries that are made by women who have placed children for adoption. There's a lot by adoptees and a lot by parents who have adopted children, but people tend to make that decision because they're coming from a space where there's a lack of resources or a lack of education, or there's just a lot of lacks, and then there's an attendant shame that happens afterwards that makes it a really difficult story to talk about. So I wanted to create that voice. I think I've also always been a storyteller. There's a moment in the film that I initially hated where I'm in the background and I'm like, when I was 9 years old and I was stacking wood, I was so ready to be interviewed. Like in Wisconsin, I was watching my husband cut wood this winter, thinking about coming here and answering questions and realizing it's kind of a continuum from when I was 9 years old in Wisconsin, stacking wood, bringing it in for the stove. I always wanted to tell stories and answer questions, and so I'm deeply grateful to be able to do that with you all today.
It seems like very much so a love story or a love letter to your daughter.
Yeah, I think it's a love story on a lot of different angles, right? I mean, and I think that like if you take those choices to love away, the whole story rewinds and doesn't happen, right? It's a love story to my husband, without having, made that decision. It all kind of played together. The more openness to love there was, the more music and beauty kept happening for all of the people in the film. So the way I looked at it was kind of like if I made a different choice at the beginning, different things would have happened, but like the bus and the music and the harp and the children in the desert, it all kind of rewinds and then none of it happens. So I think it was a love story to everything that resulted.
It was fantastic, but I'm also a car guy, so I'm curious. Do you still have the blue bus, and how many miles?
We do. It's a Genesis International. My husband would be the one to talk to afterwards. I know absolutely nothing about it. Other than that, we bought it because it had the best engine we could possibly get, which was true because on our maiden voyage, we accidentally ran it without oil for 700 miles because the oil gauge was broken. It looked like it was full. The mechanic told us it was full. And the engine lasted for 700 miles before it exploded on the far side of Chicago. My dad had been like, if you get a school bus and you try to drive it from Pittsburgh to Wisconsin, the engine's gonna blow. And sure enough, it sounded like a helicopter landed in our engine. And so right outside of Chicago, the engine blew, and we had to decide whether or not to get a new one, a rebuilt engine. So it's still running. It doesn't have very many miles on it, on this engine, but it's running really well.
Was one of the children there, is that one of her adoptive siblings?
Yeah, so my husband and I have 6 children together, so I've had 7, and she also grew up in a family of 7 children. She's the oldest of 7 in both families, really, which is part of why I feel like it's a real kind of deconstructed Sound of Music. So you got 7 children and making a lot of music and traveling around. So people always used to ask me if I was like the Sound of Music, and I said no, and then I slowly realized I couldn't avoid it. But really quickly, I have a question about slug season. So it's illegal to hunt with rifles without wearing blaze orange, right?
Yes, I think like a third of you has to have blaze orange on. It's not the prettiest color to film. I did a little bit, but they're in southern Minnesota, so it's not rifles, it's slugs. You have to use a slug shotgun because the land is too flat. The bullet travels too far.
Okay.
But no, you're totally right. Yeah,
So
you're
you-
supposed to have blaze orange on.
You're supposed to have
Somebody
one.
said that at the last Q&A too. They were like,
Well, because like people always shoot each other, which is why the law exists.
yes, for sure.
So
For sure.
when you were writing it, did you write it?
Yes.
What were you like? What was your thought process interacting? Was it like they're breaking the law and they suffer for it, or like I was wondering that throughout the whole thing?
Yeah, they. I like that read. It was based on a true story that happened back in the day before like there was roads and stuff in Minnesota. It was just like a railroad, and these people my dad knows. They went up hunting, this guy and his brother, and one shot the other, and then had to drive home with him next to him in a tarp on the train. Yeah, so.
So it actually happened in your family history.
Yes, adjacent. It's my dad's best friend's dad and uncle, so, yeah.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. No, thanks for the question.
Did you say in a tarp?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, well, so it was, it's like, this is what would have been like 1900s or something, so there's like no ambulance or something like that, so we accidentally shot him and then had to wrap him up, and that was the only way to get him back home, so, yeah.
So it wasn't like National Lampoons where Aunt whatever was on the roof of the car.
No. No, kind of. I don't know.
Let's get Will in here too, talking about Ham Ridge, because that one's a very funny piece.
Incredible. It's so good.
Yeah, it was goofy fun. I don't know. What do you want to know? I mean, we had never done a mockumentary. Jared and I, my co-writer and director, but I had always have a soft spot for Christopher Guest, and so that was part of a 48-hour film competition. I don't know if anyone's aware of it, but Friday night a bunch of teams gather and you get a genre and 3 required elements. And our genre was buddy film, but I'm like, you know what? I'm going to force it into a mockumentary. So Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, you have to turn in a completed 7-minute film. So
Yeah, you do get to take your own liberties sometimes about those.
yeah, I'm like, there's 3 pairs of buddies in there, so it's a lot of fun.
How did you manage just a cameo for Jared?
That was a bit of a contention because he wanted to play the role that I played, the main guy, Felix. But I had kind of written it and was speaking as the character, and I'm like, Jared, I want to play this character. He's like, well, if you want to, I just went to the store and bought a scarf and stuff for it. And I'm like, well, I just dressed up as him at home as well, so he let me know, he let me.
You guys really should have been a buddy pair in the movie.
We do have other films in which we buddy up, so.
There's always a next time.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Kind of reminded me of the rivalry from the movie Butter, where they're competing butter sculptors. What's on the future for y'all?
What about you?
Oh, just making more movies. I mean, I make a lot of shorts, and the dream is to make a feature one day. And so I've got a couple scripts started, but yeah, just keep making more movies.
I think in the next year we have kind of a several-year plan for how we want to take this film out into the world. So we're looking at what that's going to look like. My husband and I are also playing music together. We have a lot of ideas about a documentary. We wrote a song about an explosion, a huge historic explosion that happened across the street from our home in Pittsburgh, where 78 young girls, most of them immigrants, were just like this huge cascade of flames during the Civil War. There was a massive explosion, and we kind of want to trace their story back to Ireland, where some of the girls came from. So we'd love to do that. We're working on a lot of getting the music that's in our movie finalized and releasing that over the next year. So if you follow us on Spotify or follow us on Instagram, we're kind of, working on a lot of music and film projects and taking care of my 6 kids.
I am currently in post-production for a Western short film. Be my second Western short film, so